Deep in the quiet mountains of America, far away from the noise of the city, there stood an old wooden cabin hidden among the tall pine trees. For many years, nobody had lived there, yet travelers passing through the forest often spoke of something unusual. On certain autumn nights, a warm, golden light could sometimes be seen glowing softly through the cabin window. No one knew why. No one knew who lit it, and by morning the light was always gone. Some believed it was only moonlight playing tricks among the trees. Others believed the cabin was waiting for someone who needed peace, a place where time moved slowly, where the wind whispered through the tall pine trees, where rivers sang gentle songs through the valleys, and where the moon painted the earth with silver light. Hidden between the trees stood the old cabin, and one autumn evening a man named Daniel arrived there. Daniel was tired, not just tired from traveling, but tired from the endless noise of life, and followed an old road that disappeared into the forest. As the sun began to set, Daniel finally saw the cabin. It was small, simple, but peaceful. The wooden walls were old, covered with memories of many seasons. The windows reflected the golden light of the evening. A small chimney stood on the roof, waiting to release warm smoke into the cold night air. Daniel stepped closer and opened the door. The door made a soft wooden sound, as if the cabin was welcoming him home. Inside, everything was quiet. There was an old fireplace, a comfortable chair near the window, a small wooden table, and a shelf filled with old books. Daniel placed his bag down. For the first time in a long time, he felt calm. That night, he made a small fire in the fireplace. The gentle sound of burning wood filled the room. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. The leaves danced slowly. The stars appeared one by one in the dark sky. Daniel sat near the window and watched the moon. He listened. No traffic, no phones, no noise, only nature. And followed an old road that disappeared into the forest. As the sun began to set, Daniel finally saw the cabin. It was small, simple, but peaceful. The wooden walls were old, covered with memories of many seasons. The windows reflected the golden light of the evening. A small chimney stood on the roof, waiting to release warm smoke into the cold night air. Daniel stepped closer and opened the door. The door made a soft wooden sound, as if the cabin was welcoming him home. Inside, everything was quiet. There was an old fireplace, a comfortable chair near the window, a small wooden table, and a shelf filled with old books. Daniel placed his bag down. For the first time in a long time, he felt calm. That night, he made a small fire in the fireplace. The gentle sound of burning wood filled the room. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. The leaves danced slowly. The stars appeared one by one in the dark sky. Daniel sat near the window and watched the moon. He listened. No traffic, no phones, no noise, only nature. Daniel created a simple routine. Every morning he walked through the forest. Every afternoon he read old books inside the cabin. Every evening he watched the sunset. And every night he sat under the moonlight. The cabin slowly became his favorite place in the world. One evening, while cleaning an old shelf, Daniel discovered a small wooden box. The box was covered with dust. Inside was an old diary. The pages were yellow with age. The The handwriting belonged to someone who had lived in the cabin many years ago. Daniel opened the diary. The first page said, "If you found this diary, it means you were searching for something." Daniel continued reading. The old writer explained that he once came to the cabin because he was lost. Not lost in the forest, but lost inside his own thoughts. He wrote, "Sometimes we travel far away, not to find a new place, but to find ourselves again." Daniel closed the diary. He looked around the cabin. The old walls, the warm fireplace, the peaceful forest outside. And he smiled. Maybe this cabin was never forgotten. Maybe it was simply waiting for someone who needed peace. Weeks went by. The seasons slowly changed. The forest became more beautiful. Daniel realized something important. Happiness was not always found in big achievements. Sometimes happiness was a quiet morning, a warm drink beside the window, a peaceful walk under the trees, or the sound of rain falling on an old wooden roof. Life did not need to be rushed. Sometimes the most beautiful moments were the quiet ones. One night, Daniel sat outside the cabin. The moon was brighter than ever. The stars covered the sky. The wind moved gently through the trees. He closed his eyes and listened. The forest was breathing. The earth was resting. Everything was peaceful. Daniel knew that one day he would return to the city. But he also knew he would never forget this place, because the cabin had given him something priceless. Peace. Years later, people still talked about the old cabin in the mountains. Travelers who passed by said the same thing. When you stand near that cabin, you feel like the world becomes quieter. And maybe that was the magic of the place. Not a magic that could be seen, but a magic that could be felt. A reminder that no matter how busy life becomes, there is always a quiet place waiting somewhere. A place beneath the moonlight, where the heart can finally rest. And tonight, as the moon shines above the trees, the old cabin remains there, quiet, peaceful, waiting. Every morning, he walked through the forest. He listened to the birds. He watched the sunlight move between the trees. Every afternoon, he sat inside the cabin, reading old books, writing small thoughts in a notebook. And every evening, he watched the sunset disappear behind the mountains. The cabin slowly became more than just a place to stay. It became a place where Daniel could breathe, a place where he could finally slow down, a place where his mind could rest. The days felt longer, the nights felt deeper, and the quiet moments became the most beautiful moments of his life. One evening, while cleaning an old wooden shelf, Daniel noticed something hidden behind the books. A small wooden box. The box was covered with dust. It looked like it had been there for many years. Daniel carefully picked it up. He opened the box slowly. Inside, there was an old diary. The pages were yellow, the cover was worn, but the words inside were still clear. Daniel opened the first page. The first sentence said, "If you found this diary, it means you were searching for something." Daniel stayed quiet for a moment. Those words felt familiar, as if someone from the past understood exactly how he felt. He continued reading. The diary belonged to a person who had lived in the cabin many years before. A person who came to the mountains because life had become too heavy. The writer explained that he was not lost in the forest. He was lost inside his own thoughts. The diary said, and the quiet moments became the most beautiful moments of his life. One evening, while cleaning an old wooden shelf, Daniel noticed something hidden behind the books. A small wooden box. The box was covered with dust. It looked like it had been there for many years. Daniel carefully picked it up. He opened the box slowly. Inside, there was an old diary. The pages were yellow. The cover was worn. But the words inside were still clear. Daniel opened the first page. The first sentence said, "If you found this diary, it means you were searching for something." Daniel stayed quiet for a moment. Those words felt familiar, as if someone from the past understood exactly how he felt. He continued reading. The diary belonged to a person who had lived in the cabin many years before. A person who came to the mountains because life had become too heavy. The writer explained that he was not lost in the forest, he was lost inside his own thoughts. The diary said, "Sometimes we travel far away, not to find a new place, but to find ourselves again." Daniel slowly closed the diary. He looked around the room. The old wooden walls, the warm fireplace, the chair near the window, the peaceful forest outside. And he smiled. Maybe the cabin was never forgotten. Maybe it was simply waiting for someone who needed peace. The following weeks passed quietly. The forest continued changing. The green leaves slowly turned golden. The mornings became colder. The nights became longer. But Daniel felt happier than he had in years. He started noticing small things. The sound of rain falling on the roof. The smell of fresh coffee in the morning. The gentle movement of trees in the wind. The sound of the river far away. Things he once ignored now became precious. Daniel realized something important. Happiness was not always found in big achievements. It was not always found in money. It was not always found in being busy. Sometimes, happiness was a quiet morning, a peaceful walk, a warm drink beside the window, or simply sitting under the sky and watching the clouds move. Life did not need to be rushed. Sometimes, the most beautiful moments were the quiet ones. One night, a soft rain began falling outside the cabin. Daniel sat near the fireplace. He listened to the sound of raindrops touching the wooden roof. The fire moved gently. The room felt warm and safe. Outside, the forest was sleeping. The trees were resting. The animals were hidden in their homes. Everything felt peaceful. Daniel closed his eyes, and he remembered the person he used to be. Always running, always worried, always searching for something more. But now, he understood. The peace he was searching for was never far away. It was inside him all along. The cabin had simply helped him discover it. Months passed, and Daniel's life became quieter than ever before. The cabin was no longer a strange place in the mountains. It had become his home. Every morning, the first thing he heard was the sound of nature waking up. The birds singing softly, the wind moving through the trees, the gentle sound of the river in the distance. Daniel would open the old wooden door, step outside, and take a deep breath. The fresh mountain air filled his lungs, and for the first time in a long time, he felt truly alive. One morning, while walking deeper into the forest, Daniel found a small path he had never noticed before. The path was covered with fallen leaves. It looked like no one had walked there for many years, but something about it felt peaceful. So Daniel followed the path slowly. After walking for a while, he reached a small open area between the trees. In the middle of the clearing, there was an old wooden bench. The bench was simple, nothing special, but it had a beautiful view of the mountains. Daniel sat down, and he watched the clouds slowly moving across the sky. For a moment, everything stopped. No worries, no pressure, no noise, only peace. Daniel remembered the words from the old diary. Sometimes we travel far away, not to find a new place, but to find ourselves again. He finally understood those words. The journey was never about the cabin. It was never about escaping the world. It was about learning how to listen to himself, to nature, to the quiet moments he had forgotten. That evening, Daniel returned to the cabin before sunset. He lit the fireplace, made a warm drink, and opened his notebook. For the first time, he did not write about his problems. He did not write about what he needed to achieve. Instead, he wrote about gratitude, about the peaceful mornings, about the sound of the rain, about the feeling of being home. The pages slowly filled with simple memories, beautiful memories, the kind that people often miss, because they are always searching for something bigger. Winter slowly arrived in the mountains. The forest became covered with a soft layer of snow. The trees stood quietly beneath the white sky. The world outside became calm and still. Inside the cabin, the fireplace kept burning. The old books remained on the shelves, and Daniel continued living slowly. He realized something. A peaceful life was not an empty life. A quiet life was not a lonely life. Sometimes silence could heal things that words could not. And sometimes a small cabin in the mountains could become the place where a person finally finds himself again. Another night. As the moonlight entered through the window, Daniel looked around the cabin. The old walls, the wooden floor, the warm fire, the little memories collected over time. And he smiled, because he knew he was no longer the person who arrived here searching for peace. He had become the person who had finally found it. Days continued to pass, and Daniel's connection with the mountains grew deeper. The cabin was no longer just a shelter from the world. It was a place filled with memories. Every corner had a story. The old wooden chair near the fireplace, the small table where he wrote every night, the window where he watched the seasons change. Everything around him reminded him of the peaceful life he had discovered. One morning, Daniel woke up earlier than usual. The sky was still dark. The moon was slowly disappearing behind the mountains. He walked outside with a warm cup of coffee in his hands. The forest was completely quiet. But it was not an empty silence. It was a peaceful silence. A silence filled with the sound of nature waiting for a new day. Daniel looked at the sky and realized how many beautiful moments he had ignored before. The simple moments, the moments that did not need money, the moments that did not need success. They only needed attention. Later that day, while cleaning an old shelf inside the cabin, Daniel found another small box hidden behind the books. The wooden box was covered with dust. Slowly, he opened it. Inside, there were old photographs, pictures of the cabin, pictures of the mountains, and pictures of a man who looked very familiar. Daniel carefully looked at the photographs. Behind one picture, there was a small message written by hand. Life is not measured by how much we collect. It is measured by the moments that make our hearts feel full. Daniel smiled. He understood that the person who wrote those words had also discovered the same truth. That night, the snow started falling outside. Soft white snow covered the trees. The entire forest looked like a dream. Daniel sat beside the fireplace. He opened his notebook, and he began writing again. But this time, he was not writing about the past. He was not thinking about the life he left behind. He was writing about the life he had found. The next morning, Daniel decided to explore the mountains one more time. He followed a trail beyond the forest. The path was difficult, but every step felt meaningful. After walking for hours, he reached the top of a small hill. From there, he could see the entire valley, the river, the trees, and the little cabin standing quietly in the distance. Daniel stood there for a long time, and he realized something. The cabin had changed him. But maybe the cabin had not really changed him. Maybe it had simply helped him remember who he always was. As the sun slowly went down, Daniel walked back home. The lights from the cabin shined warmly through the trees, and for the first time, he did not feel like he was living away from the world. He felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. Because sometimes, the place we search for our entire life is not somewhere far away. Sometimes, it is a quiet place waiting for us when we are finally ready to find it. Weeks passed. Winter slowly settled over the mountains. The snow became deeper, the nights became longer, and the little cabin stood quietly beneath the silver moonlight. Daniel had grown used to the rhythm of the mountain life. Every morning, he woke to the soft glow of sunlight touching the snow-covered trees. Every evening, he sat beside the fireplace, reading, writing, thinking, and listening to the gentle crackle of burning wood. The busy world he once knew felt very far away now, like a distant dream. One evening, a strong wind moved through the forest. The trees swayed gently beneath the moonlit sky. Daniel sat near the window, watching snowflakes dance through the darkness. As he watched, a memory suddenly appeared in his mind. It was a memory from many years ago, a simple moment from childhood. He remembered sitting beside his grandfather on a quiet summer night. The old man had pointed toward the stars and said, "People spend their lives searching for happiness, but happiness is often waiting quietly beside them." At the time, Daniel had not understood those words. But now, sitting inside the old cabin, watching the snow fall outside, he finally understood. The greatest treasures were often the simplest ones. Peace, time, nature, and the people we love. A few days later, the snowfall stopped. The mountains became bright and beautiful beneath a clear blue sky. Daniel decided to take a long walk through the valley. The world around him looked untouched. The snow sparkled like tiny diamonds beneath the sunlight. The river moved slowly between banks of ice. Everything felt calm. Everything felt still. As he walked, he discovered something unusual. Near the edge of the forest, he found an old wooden bridge. It looked ancient, covered with snow and moss. Daniel had never seen it before. Carefully, he crossed the bridge. On the other side, a narrow path continued deeper into the mountains. Curious, he followed it. The trail led him to a small clearing hidden among the trees. In the center stood a single stone bench, weathered by time, covered with a thin layer of snow. Daniel brushed the snow away and sat down. The view before him was breathtaking. Rolling hills, endless forests, and distant mountains stretching toward the horizon. For a long time, he sat there in silence, listening to the wind, watching clouds drift slowly across the sky. And once again, he felt something he had not felt for many years. Contentment. Not excitement, not achievement, not success, just quiet contentment. The kind that asks for nothing more. As the afternoon faded, the sky slowly turned golden. Daniel stood and began the journey back to the cabin. The sun disappeared behind the mountains. The first stars appeared above, and soon the moon rose once again, bright and peaceful. When Daniel reached the cabin, the familiar sight filled him with warmth. The small chimney releasing smoke into the night sky, the wooden walls glowing softly beneath the moonlight, the quiet forest surrounding everything. He opened the door, stepped inside, and lit the fireplace. The cabin felt alive, not because it was large, not because it was beautiful, but because it had become a place filled with meaning. That night, Daniel sat in his chair, his notebook resting on his lap, and he wrote a single sentence. A peaceful life is not a smaller life, it is a deeper one. Then he closed the notebook. The fire continued to glow, the wind whispered softly outside, and above the mountains, the moon watched over the little cabin, as it always had. And as Daniel slowly drifted into sleep, he felt grateful for the mountains, for the cabin, and for the quiet journey that had led him home. Weeks continued to pass. Winter slowly reached its deepest point. The mountains stood silent beneath thick blankets of snow. The forest seemed asleep. Even the river moved more slowly now. And high above, the moon continued its endless journey across the night sky. Daniel's days had become simple, peacefully simple. Each morning he would light the fireplace, prepare a warm cup of coffee, and sit by the window, watching the world awaken beneath the winter sunlight. There was no rush, no deadlines, no endless noise, only quiet moments, one after another. And somehow, those moments felt more valuable than anything he had left behind. One cold afternoon, as snow gently fell outside, Daniel decided to explore the attic of the cabin. He had rarely gone there. The narrow wooden stairs creaked beneath his feet. Dust floated through the soft sunlight. The attic was small, filled with forgotten objects, old boxes, broken furniture, faded photographs, and memories belonging to people he had never known. As Daniel searched through the attic, he discovered a small wooden chest hidden beneath an old blanket. The chest was worn with age, its corners were scratched, its lock had long ago rusted away. Carefully, Daniel opened it. Inside, he found dozens of letters, yellowed with time, neatly tied together with a faded blue ribbon. Curious, he sat beside the attic window and began reading. The letters had been written many years earlier. They belonged to a husband and wife, the original owners of the cabin. Many of the letters spoke about ordinary things, the weather, the garden, the changing seasons, simple moments of daily life. But as Daniel continued reading, he noticed something special. Every letter contained gratitude, not for wealth, not for success, not for fame, but for small things. A sunrise, a snowfall, a quiet evening together beside the fire, a walk through the forest, a shared cup of tea. Daniel smiled softly. The words felt familiar, almost as if the cabin itself had been teaching him the very same lesson. As evening approached, he carefully returned the letters to the chest. But one sentence stayed with him, written in elegant handwriting near the end of a letter. The secret of a beautiful life is learning to notice beautiful moments. Daniel repeated the words quietly, again and again. The secret of a beautiful life, learning to notice beautiful moments. Outside, the snowfall had stopped. The clouds slowly drifted apart, and a clear winter night emerged. Daniel stepped outside. The air was cold but refreshing. The snow reflected the moonlight so brightly that the entire valley seemed to glow. The forest shimmered like silver. The mountains looked timeless, ancient, unchanging. For several minutes, Daniel simply stood there, looking toward the horizon, listening. There was no sound, only stillness, only peace. And in that silence, he realized something. For years, he had searched for meaning in distant places, in future goals, in things he hoped to achieve. Yet meaning had never been hiding far away. It had always existed in the present moment, in quiet mornings, in peaceful evenings, in gratitude, in being fully awake to life itself. A gentle breeze moved through the trees. The branches sparkled beneath the moonlight. Daniel took a deep breath and smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because he no longer needed perfection. The simple beauty around him was enough. When he finally returned to the cabin, the fire was still glowing softly. Warm light danced across the wooden walls. The old clock ticked quietly. The cabin felt more like home than ever before. That night, before going to sleep, Daniel opened his notebook once again and wrote, "The happiest moments often arrive quietly, without announcing themselves." He placed the notebook beside the bed, blew out the lantern, and lay beneath the warm blankets. Outside, the moon shone brightly above the silent mountains. The forest slept peacefully. The snow reflected silver light across the valley, and as Daniel slowly drifted into dreams, the old cabin stood watch beneath the moonlight. Quiet, warm, timeless, waiting for another beautiful day to begin.